When I say the name Dominique Wilkins, what's the first thing that springs into your mind? Dunks? Perhaps. For some out there, it's going to be his kick-ass nickname, the Human Highlight Film. For most folks, though, when they hear the name Dominique Wilkins, the first thing they think about is going to be the Atlanta Hawks, and in particular, the cool Pac-Man logo and those awesome uniforms from that era. What no one associates with Dominique Wilkins is the Los Angeles Clippers, but the end of the superstar's time in the ATL was peculiar to say the least. It involved a no-win trade for all parties involved, leading to a blink and you missed it stint with the National Basketball Association's most miserable franchise at the time, those Los Angeles Clippers. I am Cheyenne Hollis. This is the Touchback, and today, Dominique does Hollywood. When Michael Jordan abruptly retired after the 1993 NBA Finals, it really opened the door for a number of very good Eastern Conference teams that had been unable to get past the Chicago Bulls. Among those vying for the crown were the Atlanta Hawks, led by aging but still effective superstar Dominique Wilkins, and an interesting cast of supporting characters. Stacey Augmon, Kevin Willis, and ascending Mookie Blaylock, really solid players who all orbited around the Hawks' true star. Prior to the 1993-94 campaign, the Hawks made a coaching change, replacing Bob Weiss with Lenny Wilkins, a proven winner, albeit one whose postseason track record had taken a bit of a hit during his stint with the Cleveland Cavaliers when the team just could not beat those Michael Jordan-led Bulls. Things did not get off to the best start for the Hawks in the 93-94 season. In fact, they opened the year 1-4. Now, it must be said there is a bit of an asterisk next to that record. That stretch included a West Coast road trip where they played 3 games in 4 nights. However, the situation would turn around quickly after that 1-4 start. The team won its next 14 games consecutively, and things really began looking up for Atlanta. In fact, for most of the next 2 months, they sat atop the Eastern Conference. The Hawks were one of the NBA's best teams, and they looked like real contenders in the post-Jordan NBA landscape for this season. Things were going so well that Dominique Wilkins and Mookie Blaylock were both named to the Eastern Conference All-Star team, which was being coached by their head coach, Lenny Wilkins, who went into the All-Star break having guided the Hawks to the best record in the Eastern Conference. That took place on February 13th, 11 days later, and everything would change. On February 23rd, the Hawks beat the Seattle Supersonics in what was the game of the NBA's best teams at the time. It was a huge victory for the side, and everything really seemed to be pointing upward for the Hawks. One day later, and the unthinkable happened. The Hawks had traded Dominique Wilkins, their franchise icon, the man who had become synonymous with the Atlanta Hawks. Not only that, they didn't just trade him, but they traded him to the Los Angeles Clippers. They banished him to basketball's purgatory. Those Clippers were 17-34 at the time of the transaction and were residing in the Pacific Division cellar. Even 30 years later, this is one of those trades that's difficult to process, difficult to sort of understand what the hell was everyone thinking here, but let's try to do just that. Wilkins was shipped to LA along with a 1994 first-round pick and a conditional 1995 first-round pick for Danny Manning. Now, Manning was 7 years younger than the Human Highlight Film, which was probably, at least on the surface, one of the main reasons to execute this trade. That brings us to the most important aspect of this deal, though. Wilkins and Manning were both free agents at the end of the season. They were both on expiring contracts. So it's not like the Hawks were acquiring Manning, who would play for them for 2, 3, 4 more seasons. One thing we do know is that the Hawks weren't necessarily interested in extending Wilkins' contract beyond the end of the 94 season. They had held some talks with him, but honestly, Wilkins was probably going to command more money than they felt comfortable giving to a player who would be entering his age 35 season. While understandable, it's also important to note that Wilkins was still playing at a very high level, an all NBA level at this juncture in time. Now, he wasn't as great as his peak years, but it's not like he had declined massively from just a 3-4 year period ago. The Clippers were, well, the Clippers, and that meant Danny Manning was as good as gone at season's end when he would be a free agent. He would just simply be asking for too much money. Donald Sterling had notoriously refused to pay anyone any sort of money, which is not surprising when you look at the roster as well as what he did with Larry Brown the season previously. The logic for them to make this transaction was pretty simple. Maybe Wilkins could help them sell a few more tickets, something Manning was not doing at the time. The human highlight film, while slightly on the decline, was still a bona fide NBA superstar, more so than Danny Manning was or ever would be. At the very least, maybe some curious onlookers would want to come out to the dump that was the LA Sports Arena just to see Dominique Wilkins up close and personal, something that they hadn't really had the chance to do in the Western Conference apart from that one trip the Hawks would make out there, well, two in LA's case, every season. Plus, they got the Hawks to throw in a first-round draft pick for a player, again, that wasn't in their future plans. Atlanta's logic as it relates to this deal is far less clear. Now, there had been some rumblings, and you'll read some things out there that said the Atlanta front office and Lenny Wilkins didn't think he was a winning player or he didn't fit into the team's defensive structure. Manning was seen as a much more malleable piece in that regard, someone who could come in and do a lot of different things really well. That being said, he was definitely not a game changer. Even at 34 years of age, Wilkins was still a dynamic scorer, a guy who could go out and get you a bucket if your team needed it. That was an extremely valuable skill, especially in the early to mid 1990s NBA, where defenses were just sort of sucking all the fun out of the game. Having a perimeter scorer, a dynamic perimeter scorer like Dominique Wilkins, could be the difference in games. Even if you want to agree with the fact that Manning was a better organizational fit for the Hawks and what they wanted to do on the court as a basketball team, there was a larger issue here at play. That being, of course, that Manning was still a free agent after season's end. There was no guarantee Manning was going to be there long term, that he would sign a new contract with the team. Now, publicly, he made some very positive statements. I'm sure there were talks between the two parties, but again, you weren't getting anything solid from Manning. You gave up Wilkins, a hugely important player, as well as a first-round pick to acquire a guy who may have been there for a third of the season plus playoffs. But more on that later. Exchanging the franchise icon that was Dominique Wilkins in Atlanta for, again, Danny Manning, it just wasn't a good look for the team. As you would expect, Wilkins was pissed off about the trade, especially because the team was in the middle of a potential title run, something that wasn't all of that common for Atlanta while Wilkins was with the team. Here is what the human highlight film said about the deal to the Seattle Times. The disappointment still hasn't left me. The Hawks have a chance to win a title, and I wanted to be a part of that. I still don't understand it. It's the most senseless trade I can imagine. Nothing against Danny, but I'm still a little sour. Wilkins did little to hide his annoyance with how everything went down and just where he found himself at. In fact, one of the best stories about the transaction came when Wilkins showed up in Los Angeles and he mistook one of his new teammates for a ball boy. He demanded the individual bring him a pair of socks immediately, only for that person to inform Wilkins that he was in fact a new teammate and not a ball boy there to run errands for him. He may not have been particularly happy with how everything went down, but when Wilkins showed up to Los Angeles, he was given full freedom to do just about whatever the hell he wanted to do on the court for the Clippers, who were still in the midst of trying to make that Ron Harper, Mark Jackson backcourt work. The result didn't end in many wins for the team, but it was entertaining nonetheless. Wilkins was on a mission, even if no one was there to see it. In 25 contests with the Clippers, Wilkins averaged 29.1 points per game on nearly 24 shots. The results didn't yield much in terms of on-court successes. The Clippers went 8-17. The highlight for the human highlight film during his brief stint in La La Land had to have been a trip to Atlanta where he got a face-off against his former team, the Atlanta Hawks. Despite the two teams being on total opposites of the standings spectrum, the Clippers, led by Wilkins, would upset the playoff-bound Hawks. He would score 36 points on that night and added 10 rebounds as he embarrassed Danny Manning, who could only muster 6 points in 29 minutes of game action. The loss, though, of course, didn't really matter much to Atlanta. They were well on their way to becoming the #1 seed in the Eastern Conference. Home fans probably weren't all of that delighted to see their former hero come and absolutely torch them, destroying the man who was supposed to replace Wilkins in the starting lineup. And I mean, make no mistake, this was just a single-handedly revenge performance from Dominique Wilkins, and it was beautiful. While Wilkins delivered on the court and held up his end of the bargain here, he wasn't enough to get people out to that Los Angeles Memorial Sports Arena as the team finished last in the league in attendance. He also wouldn't be sticking around with the Clippers after that brief 25-game cameo. After the season, he entered free agency and eventually would sign with the Boston Celtics. Things in Atlanta ended in greater disappointment. Despite finishing the regular season as the #1 overall seed in the Eastern Conference, the first round provided quite the shock to the Hawks system, where the 8th-seeded Miami Heat almost upset them. Atlanta needed all 5 first-round games to sneak past Miami. That would be as good as it got for the team. In the Eastern Conference semifinals, they matched up against the 5th-seeded Indiana Pacers, who had really no issues dispatching them in 6 games. The offseason brought even more bad news for the Atlanta Hawks because Danny Manning, despite all of those positive rumblings when being traded to the team, didn't re-sign with them. Instead, he opted for a free agent deal with the Phoenix Suns. The entire ordeal turned off fans and burned a bridge with a franchise legend that would take years to rebuild. Look, maybe keeping Wilkins doesn't change Atlanta's fortunes in the postseason. There's no real way to determine just how much he could have made a difference in that Indiana series, given that the Pacers were a pretty good team, all things considered. But having him around over Danny Manning, well, it certainly wouldn't have been any worse. More importantly, banning such a key figure in franchise history, a man who really helped put Atlanta basketball on the map. It was just such a dick move by the Hawks front office, and especially because they sent him to the Clippers, a team that was not only out of contention, but a team that no one ever wanted to play for at this point in history. That brings us back to Dominique Wilkins. You know, today we're in a day and age where older players, when they get traded, they just sit out, wait for a buyout, and then go chase a ring. Quite frankly, in this story, it was refreshing to see Wilkins go out there and still suit up for the Clippers, even though they were god awful. These were by definition meaningless games. It didn't matter whether the Clippers won these games, whether they lost these games, Dominique played, Dominique didn't play. None of that had any bearing on what would play out for the NBA season to close out 93-94. But I'll be damned if he didn't go out there and put up points and give fans a show. That, hats off to you, Dominique. And that's something that I wish we would see more of in modern day NBA. He may not have won a lot during his stint in Los Angeles, but this peculiar trade did provide the world with one of the more unique 25-game stretches in NBA history. Thank you for watching this video. If you'd like to know a little bit more about what happened to every single one of LeBron James's teammates in Miami, well, check out the video in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Until next time, I am Cheyenne Hollis. This is the Touchback, and as always, hashtag take it out to the 25.